The rain never really stops in Washington. It taps on rooftops, hums against the windows, and somehow finds its way into your thoughts. That morning, as I stood by the kitchen window watching the drizzle slide down the glass, I got the call that would change everything. It was from my son, Richard. His voice was cold, clipped, rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "the lawyer called. The will's been read. I'll pick you up at 10. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. The will. Even after months without John, I still couldn't make myself say the word death. He was my husband, my partner for 47 years, a man who could fix anything except the silence that grew between him and our son. Richard arrived exactly at 10, in his usual dark suit, like he was attending a business meeting, not his father's final farewell. He didn't hug me. Didn't even look at the photos that still lined the hallway. "Let's go," he said simply, and I followed him out into the mist. At the lawyer's office, the air smelled of polished wood and old paper. Henry Collins, John's attorney for decades, greeted me kindly with that soft sadness people use when they don't know what else to say. He read the will carefully, each word deliberate. John had left the main house and a modest inheritance to me. But the rest, the investments, the company shares, everything we'd built over a lifetime, would remain in a charitable trust for 2 years. After that, if Richard had proven himself responsible, compassionate, and worthy, as the letter stated, he would inherit it all. If not, the assets would go entirely to the community foundation John had supported quietly for years. Richard's jaw tightened. "That's insane," he said, his voice rising. "He's punishing me from the grave?" Henry sighed. "No, son, he's giving you time." I didn't say a word, not because I agreed or disagreed, but because deep down I knew John had seen something in our son that even I had refused to admit, a hunger, not for love, but for control. When we left the office, Richard didn't drive me home right away. He parked by the pier where gulls circled over gray waves and stared out the windshield. "I've got this handled, Mom," he said finally. "You just take care of yourself. Leave the legal stuff to me." His tone wasn't comforting. It was final, like a command. I nodded, even though something inside me twisted, because I knew my son wasn't planning to earn John's inheritance. He was planning to claim it. That night, as I sat alone by the fire, I opened John's old journal. There were sketches of his workshop, notes about the foundation, and one line underlined twice. If Richard ever forgets what family means, she'll remind him. I didn't know then what those words would lead to, but I promised myself I wouldn't let John's legacy, or my own heart, be turned into another one of Richard's calculations. The rain fell harder outside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. For the first 2 weeks, Richard became the kind of son people brag about on holiday cards. He started calling every morning at 8, never earlier, never later. "Just checking in," he'd say, his voice smooth as glass. He asked what I'd had for breakfast, whether I'd taken my vitamins, if I needed anything from town. He didn't wait long enough for honest answers. The calls felt like boxes on a list. Check, check, check. By the third day, a crew of contractors arrived at my house with a clipboard and a brand new color palette. They were friendly enough, but they spoke to me like a client who'd already agreed to everything. "We'll take down these upper cabinets," the foreman said. "Modern kitchens are all about open shelving." I looked at the space where John's hands had once measured, sanded, and fitted every hinge. "Open," I repeated. And the word felt like a draft. Richard came by in the afternoon to walk the project. He wore a blazer and sneakers, that uniform of men who run on prestige and green juice. "You'll love this, Mom," he said, gesturing like a realtor. "We'll brighten the walls, refinish the floors, smarten up the lighting, motion sensors, voice control, everything effortless." "I don't want effortless," I said softly. "I want familiar." He smiled without seeing me. "That's just nostalgia talking. You'll thank me later." The post started soon after. A photo of us at my kitchen table, his hand around a mug he never drank from. The caption, "Nothing like coffee with Mom, family first." Then a video of him wheeling in a massive flat screen, me standing behind him trying to keep my balance on the rolled-up rug. The caption, "Upgrading her space. She deserves the best." My friends from the community center texted hearts and clapping hands. I didn't correct them. Some illusions don't need a rebuttal, they just need time. When he couldn't come in person, Richard sent deliveries, meal kits I didn't ask for, ergonomic pillows I didn't need, a set of knives heavy enough to make my wrists ache. "Quality," he said on the phone, "screams love." "Love doesn't scream," I said. "It cooks quietly and wipes the counters." He laughed like I'd told a charming joke. "You're cute when you're folksy." The night it all clicked. The rain was steady and the house smelled like lemon oil and wet wood. He thought I was asleep. Contractors had left early and I'd disappeared down the hall to rest my eyes. But I heard Richard's voice on the patio, low and clipped, the way people talk when they're making promises money will have to keep. 2 years. That's it, he said. Collins can sign off with the right documentation. She's safe, independent, well-supported, exact phrasing. We keep the optics tight, photos, visits, receipts. After that, I consolidate. The trust dissolves, I roll it into the holding company and the foundation. Look, Dad meant well, but he wasn't a strategist. He paused, listening. Yes, I'm tracking expenses. Yes, I know the number. 87 point something. No, there won't be surprises. I stood in the hallway, one hand on the wall the way you do when dizziness passes through like a quick wave. It wasn't the money that turned my stomach, it was the arithmetic he used on human beings. His father had been an equation to complete. I was a required variable, love, a line item. He ended the call with a light, professional, "Appreciate it," stepped back inside and nearly ran into me. For a second, his face opened, boyish, caught. Then the mask returned. "Couldn't sleep?" "Too much noise," I said. He glanced at the torn-up flooring. "It'll be worth it," he promised. "Trust me." Trust. The small word sat between us like an instrument no one remembered how to play. The next day, I asked him to leave my bedroom and John's chair alone. "Everything else can change," I said. "Not these," he shrugged. "We'll see." "Not we," I corrected. "Me." He started bringing flowers, costly arrangements that smelled like airports. He set them where the camera would catch them best and repositioned the vase until the label faced forward. Then he snapped photos like proof and glanced at his watch. Gratitude on his schedule. When he left, I moved the flowers to the laundry room where the air was cooler. On the counter, I kept John's small tin of screws, the mismatched kind you save because someday one will fit. I turned the tin in my hands and thought about the difference between fixing and replacing, between making do and making shine. One is love, the other is theater. I began to write things down, not everything, not with bitterness, just enough to remember. Times, dates, the tone of his voice, the words he chose when he thought words didn't matter. Not because I planned a fight, because truth is a raft you build before the flood. At the community center, Melanie noticed the new tired in my face. "You okay?" "I will be," I said. She didn't push. Some women ask a second time. The wise ones wait for the third. Richard's care plan expanded. He hired a private trainer to come twice a week and instruct me on balance exercises in a voice that belonged in a boutique gym. "Core engaged, Eleanor. Control the tremor." I wanted to tell him tremors don't ask for permission, but I did the moves. I am not opposed to strength. I simply prefer it quiet. He arranged a financial review with his advisors, which meant 3 young men arrived with tablets and callus-free hands. They explained my own accounts to me as if I were a tourist who didn't speak the language. "We'll streamline," one said. "We'll optimize," said another. "We'll protect," said the third. I smiled politely and poured coffee. Protection that feels like possession is not protection. It is weather dressed as shelter. Then came Sunday, the day he booked a family brunch at a waterfront restaurant with tall windows and shorter patients. He took selfies with me against the gray bay, posted blessed to care for the woman who made me who I am, and ordered avocado toast he didn't touch. On the way out, he said, "We should do this weekly. People love consistency." I answered, "They love sincerity more." He patted my arm as if I were the one not understanding. "Both," he said, "preferably both." That afternoon I made soup the way John liked it. Chicken, a little rice, lemon at the end. I ate it from his favorite bowl and let the steam curl the edges of the day. And then I called Henry Collins. "Henry," I said when he answered, "I need to hear my husband's voice again." There was a pause. "Come by tomorrow," he said gently. "There's something of John's you haven't seen." I slept, not well, but honestly. In the morning, the rain felt less like a drum and more like a metronome. The house hummed with sawdust and plans, and I stood in the doorway to John's workshop, now half empty, half waiting, and let my eyes adjust to the light. At Henry's office, he closed the door and slid a simple envelope across the desk. On the front, in John's steady hand, for her judgment, for her heart. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, blue ink. If you're reading this, it means I'm trusting you to finish what I started. I'm not testing Richard's love. I'm measuring his compass. Money expands the life of a man who already knows where he's going. It shrinks the life of a man who is lost. Don't let what we built become his map if he won't learn to read the sky. If he proves worthy, bless him. If he does not, bless the town that loved us when no one was counting. I set the letter down and pressed my fingertips to the grain of Henry's desk, the way you steady yourself before stepping onto a moving boat. "What can I do?" I asked. "Whatever you decide," Henry said. "That's why he trusted you. You're the keeper of the meaning, not the money." On the way home, I took the long road by the water. Boats bobbed like commas in a sentence the bay was still composing. A row of gulls faced the wind together, their feet light on the rail as if they'd mastered the art of staying without holding on. When I walked back into my half-finished kitchen, a new paint sample sat on the counter, another cold gray labeled Harbor Mist, Richard's handwriting beneath, "Final choice, okay?" I picked up a pen, crossed out final, and wrote, "Not yet." That evening, he called. "We're almost there, Mom. Everything's moving." "Yes," I said, "everything is." He took my agreement like consent. It was, in fact, preparation. I signed up quietly to volunteer twice a week. No announcements, no photos. I cooked for the center, sorted donated coats, learned the names of the widowers who came early and stayed late, because going home is hardest when home echoes. The work didn't change my situation. It changed my pace. And when your pace changes, your choices stop tripping over themselves. A week later, I asked Richard for a ride. His favorite posture, the rescuer behind the wheel. "Where to?" he asked. "The community foundation in town," I said. He didn't flinch. "Great optics," he replied. "Let me make a few calls." He assumed I meant a tour, a handshake, a photo for his story. I met a meeting with the director, a woman named Liana who shook my hand like we'd both agreed to move furniture. We spoke in plain terms, help for seniors who outlived their safety nets, scholarships for kids whose hope got priced out of their zip code, a mobile clinic that could cross the county line before excuses did, no plaques, no naming rights, outcomes, not headlines. "Can we be ready in 18 months?" I asked. Liana blinked, then smiled the way people do when they stop bracing. "Yes," she said, "we can." On the drive home, Richard was buoyant. "That was perfect," he said. "We'll do a press piece when the time's right. Donors love stories like yours." "It isn't a story," I answered. "It's a plan." He didn't hear the difference. That night, I moved John's chair back to its original spot and set the tin of screws on the windowsill where the light could find it. I brewed cinnamon coffee and watched the rain thin to a gentle thread. There are moments when a life turns the way a clock strikes, quiet, precise, undeniable. This was one of them. I wasn't waiting to see which way my son would lean. I was building a place for the weight to land, no matter where he fell. and for the first time since the will, I felt the steadiness of a woman who knows she can carry what comes next. By spring, the renovations were complete, at least on paper. The house gleamed like a showroom, every surface polished to a kind of emptiness. Richard hosted a thank you dinner to celebrate, inviting his partners, 2 neighbors he barely knew, and a photographer. He arrived early, arms full of wine bottles, eyes full of performance. "Mom," he said, kissing the air near my cheek, "tonight's about you, the matriarch of the Miller legacy." Legacy. That word again. It hung in the air like perfume gone sour. The guests came, praised the decor, and complimented my energy. Richard toasted with the ease of a man rehearsing for a documentary. "To family," he said, "to lessons learned, and to my father's vision." Glasses clinked, cameras flashed. When it was over, he left me with a spotless kitchen and a hollow quiet. I looked around at what he'd made. Marble where there had been pine, symmetry where there had been memory. He had scrubbed away every sign of us. Later that night, as I wiped down a counter that didn't need cleaning, I noticed a small envelope tucked under a vase of lilies. My name in Richard's handwriting. Inside, a check. No message, no note. Just his signature. The next day, I called Henry Collins. "Henry," I said, "can a son pay his mother to stay silent?" He sighed. "Legally, no. Morally, often." We met again the following week. I brought John's letter, the one Henry had given me months earlier, folded in half and worn at the edges. "I think I'm ready," I said. Henry nodded. "Then let's make it official." We went over the trust documents carefully, every clause, every condition. John had built it so thoroughly that Richard couldn't touch the funds unless every requirement was met, including a signed certification from me stating he had acted in good faith. Henry looked up. "You understand what that means?" I smiled faintly. "It means he won't get a dime." That weekend, I invited Richard for coffee. He arrived with his usual confidence, phone in hand, checking messages between sentences. "Mom, you look good," he said absently. "Everything okay?" "I wanted to talk about your father," I began. He rolled his eyes. "Not another lecture about integrity, I hope." "Not a lecture," I said. "A memory." I told him about the first years of the company, how John would fix engines until midnight, how we shared soup in the garage when the heat broke, how he once said, "If we ever make money, let it never own us." Richard smiled tightly. "That's poetic, Mom, but times change." "They do," I agreed. "That's why I'm changing the trust." He froze. "What?" "I've spoken with Henry. I'm authorizing the foundation transfer early." He laughed, not the amused kind, but the sharp bark of disbelief. "You can't. That's not—" "I can," I said quietly. "It was your father's clause. If I determine the original intent is at risk." His phone buzzed. He didn't answer. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once comforted after his first failure, that same helplessness, stripped of arrogance. "Why are you doing this to me?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm finishing what your father started." He stood there, searching for the right words, but all he found was anger. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll regret something honest." He left, slamming the door so hard the vase shattered. The lilies spilled across the floor, pale, perfect, and lifeless. I swept them into the bin, each petal like a small confession. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house and realized I didn't belong in it anymore. It wasn't my home. It was a museum curated by someone who mistook control for care. So I packed a single suitcase and drove to a small cabin John and I had bought decades ago by the coast, the kind of place where the sea erases your plans and gives you peace instead. The next morning, the sun rose orange over the bay, and for the first time in years, I didn't hear anyone telling me what I should do. Just waves, just quiet, just mine. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Richard again. No calls, no texts, only silence. The kind that feels less like peace and more like plotting. Then, one evening, the phone rang. His name flashed across the screen. I answered, expecting another argument, but his voice was strangely calm. "Mom," he said, "I need to see you. Tomorrow, at the house." "The house?" I repeated. "The one you redesigned into a showroom?" He ignored the jab. "Please, it's important." When I arrived, the place was staged as if for a magazine shoot. Candles, flowers, even the air smelled like apology, a scent too sweet to trust. Richard stood by the dining table, holding a stack of papers. "It's from Collins," he said. "He wants your signature on the final transfer documents." I raised an eyebrow. "Final transfer? I thought that was settled." He forced a smile. "Just a formality. For tax purposes." He gestured to the last page, where a small line waited for my name. I glanced at the wording. "Full authorization for estate liquidation." He'd tried to make it sound bureaucratic, but I've lived long enough to know betrayal wears polite fonts. I looked up at him and smiled. "You always did prefer shortcuts." "Mom, it's not like that." "It's exactly like that." I folded the papers neatly and set them aside. "Do you know what your father said when he made this trust?" He stayed silent. He said, "If I'm not here to teach him, let the consequences do it for me." His face twitched. Guilt, maybe, or fury. Hard to tell anymore. He reached for the documents. "You're making a mistake." "I've made many," I said, "but this isn't one." He stormed out without another word, and the house went quiet again. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, small, deliberate, like punctuation marks. I stood by the window, watching them collect, each one catching the reflection of the life I refused to surrender. The next morning, I met Henry at his office. "I didn't sign," I said. He nodded. I figured as much. He handed me a new folder. "Here's what you will sign. The foundation charter. It's ready." The name at the top made me smile. The Eleanor and John Miller Fund for Second Chances. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. The one thing my son had misplaced somewhere between ambition and inheritance. Henry hesitated before I left. "He'll be angry," he warned. "He already is," I said. "But maybe anger will finally make him look in the mirror." That night, I sat in my cabin by the sea. The tide was high, the wind sharp but clean. I made myself coffee, black and steady, the way John used to drink it. For the first time in months, I wrote a letter. Not for lawyers, not for records, but for my son. "Richard, you were raised to build, not to take. You think control is power, but it's just fear wearing expensive shoes. I forgive you, because forgiveness frees me, not you. If someday you remember who you were before the cameras and the deals, you'll know where to find me. By the ocean, fixing what's worth keeping." I left the letter unsealed, just in case he ever learned to read between the lines. The foundation launched 3 months later. We funded 20 scholarships, repaired a shelter, and rebuilt a clinic roof that leaked through every winter. No press, no speeches, just quiet work. Sometimes I see his name online, interviews, panels, applause. But lately, I noticed the tone changing, the shine fading. People sense when a man trades soul for strategy. As for me, I'm fine. Better than fine. The air tastes like freedom. My hands smell like coffee and cedar. And when the gulls sweep low over the water, I imagine John laughing somewhere in the wind. He was right all along. You can't lose what was never meant to be owned. Only what you forget to love.